Welcome to Slight Reliability, learning SRE one day at a time. I'm Stephen Townshend. Welcome back to Slight Reliability. I'm Stephen Townshend, and this is the show where we talk about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. Today on the show, I have Anurag Gupta from Shoreline.io here to talk to us today about the Reliabilityorg community. So hi, how are you going?
Hey, I'm doing great. Nice to meet you.
I thought to kick off today, could you give a bit of introduction about yourself, your career, and how you got involved in SRE, and also a little bit about Shoreline.
Sure. So my name is Anurag. I'm the CEO and founder of Shoreline.io, a company I really created to help to automate the repetitive, mundane things that SREs deal with day to day and give them time back so that they can do all of the creative, important work that needs doing, but we lack time for. Before this, I was at AWS for 8 years, where I ran database and analytics and grew it from a few thousand servers to several million servers. And, the thing about databases, of course, is you can't just, when the database goes down, you can't just give somebody a new database to work with. You kind of have to get them their data back. And so we used to ticket per database instance that had an issue. So automation was really important to us in terms of, just being able to sleep, and learned a lot about how to do things there, and also thought a lot about how to do things better. Before that, 3 startups in the data space, mostly with a couple of 2 exits, 1 IPO, and before that, I'm an old guy. Oracle, back in the days when there were 20 people in the database kernel team at Oracle. It was a lot of fun.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's hard to know what to automate and what not to automate. Do you think it's important to simplify something manually first before trying to automate it, or is just jumping in and automating an effective technique?
No, you need to know what you're going to do, right? So the goal is really to debug something, on a one-off basis, maybe convert that into an automated runbook, which lets other people, be as good as you were. Like everybody is the best, is equivalent to the best SRE. You have fewer escalations. That's why you want to invest the time. But, the thing about a runbook, when people talk about that, but it's not actually, it's just a wiki. It's not runnable. So actually getting something that's runnable is a big deal. And then once, you find paths down that, you just keep doing again and again. Why is a human being involved? Once you find those well-trod paths, automate it away.
I can't remember how I found out about Reliabilityorg, but it's I'm really enjoying the Slack community. So I just was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how that came about. What's the goal? And
Yeah, so Reliability.org is a nonprofit, vendor-neutral place where people can just talk with each other, learn with each other on how to design, build, maintain highly reliable systems. So my take is that, you can go to school and get a degree in how to build databases, how to build compilers, and how to do lots of things. There really isn't any sort of degree program in figuring out how to build highly reliable systems beyond, like distributed systems kind of stuff, which is kind of okay. But, we're really learning it from maybe a few books like Mal Murphy's in the community. He's obviously the godfather of SRE. But, we learn it mostly from bitter experience. And that's pretty unfortunate, right? Because there is a lot of bitter experience before you know what to do the next time. And then new people come in as well and mess up your site. And so, so I thought that if we could just connect people together, that'd be great. For a while now, I've been running a LinkedIn video channel where I just basically talk about stuff in terms, in generally around reliability but other sort of how to start how to build a startup, how to think about what to build, all sorts of topics, but really about reliability. But it's a one-way channel. And that's unfortunate, right? Because you get a few questions in, you answer them, but it's very different from having vibrant discussions. And so I thought reliability.org might be a place where people who care, can talk with each other and, have access to experts and have, also express their opinions without vendors coming in and saying like, oh, what you need is this. It just happens that exactly what you need is the tool I'm selling.
I had a while ago, Kyle Forster and Shay Stewart from Runway on. They were sort of talking about how companies like Facebook and Google, they have so many SREs internally that they have their own community. Yep. And they can not only leverage the community knowledge, but even leverage the tools and utilities that other people build as well. So there's a lot of of value in that. I know a guy in New Zealand. He's part of quite a big retail type website company. He's the only SRE in the whole company,
God.
He doesn't have the luxury of a community. So yeah, I think it's fantastic having the chance to have a community with cross-company collaboration. Have you seen much of that before?
I was going to say that, when I was at AWS, every week, everybody who kind of ran a service or, ran operations for a service, we'd all pile into a room and we'd look at the outages from the last week or the last, month or whatever. And not because there are our outages, hopefully, mostly there were not, right? There are a lot of services, but so we could learn so that, you could follow the there, but for the grace of God, go I, and, avoid it for yourself, right? And it's a great learning mechanism to improve without, and, I just miss that in some ways. But exactly as you say, you use a set of tools and technologies at a company, and, how much better is it to have access to everybody, at Apple or Google or Facebook or Amazon to contribute in as well, to the degree they're willing, right?
So if you're an SRE and you want to collaborate, you have a question maybe, or you want to share something you're doing in your organization, how often do you think it will come up that there's some reason you can't share or the specifics, or because of some legal or reputational thing? Is there going to be sort of barriers around people collaborating across companies, do you think, in a meaningful way?
Absolutely. Yes. People are often very careful about, sharing their dirty laundry, right? Which is unfortunate, right? Because we've all got dirty laundry. And I think that was the whole start of that blameless culture within companies. And I think as long as you build a blameless culture across companies, it's better. But we have all these communities for developers now, right? And where people go and they even search for answers to their questions before doing anything on their own. I wish that the same thing existed for operating systems. Running systems as opposed to building systems. But it doesn't, not really. And certainly not with a degree of expertise to it. It's very hard to separate the wheat from the chaff on Slashdot or something like that.
Yeah. Going back to something you said earlier, there's no university course for SRE, or even from my experience, even operations or testing or anything except development. That was the only thing that I learned at university, was how to develop, how to write code, and maybe a bit about design of software.
So yeah, there's some stuff for testing. There's just the sliver of stuff for like documentation and so forth. And there's essentially nothing for, like even doing IT work, or except maybe at a community college. And there's absolutely nothing I can think of for how to operate systems, particularly operate your environments in a reliable way.
So my understanding, my interpretation is that SRE, it obviously started at Google quite a long time ago. It's spreading around the industry. It seems to be being interpreted in different ways by different people in different companies. I think that puts. I don't want to be a gatekeeper either. Like, if someone, I know quite a lot of people who were performance testers. That's the kind of background I had, and they're now. I'm an SRE, but they still mostly do performance testing in non-production environments. And I struggle to say, that's SRE, because I feel like production is an important part of the equation here. But do you think that it's challenging when SRE is being, people have been given this title, like you do SRE, but not actually changing? Do we need consistency?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, and it also feels like it's turning into a middle child. The eldest child is DevOps, the middle child is SRE. Now the youngest child getting all the love is platform engineering. And so, I'm not sure that the labels are really that meaningful. My personal take is I want to avoid incidents. And so there's a lot of engineering involved in that. And I want to run the process when you have an incident better. And I want to run the process of after I had an incident, preventing it in the future way better, right? That's really how you make things better. It's basically one incident at a time. So that's actually why I think performance work is incredibly relevant, because if you do that work well in dev environment or test environment, you can prevent things from happening in production, right? And so in that sense, I do think it's super relevant. But we have a lot of labels out there right now, right? It's just finally what matters is, what's your uptime? How many incidents are you happening? How often do you wake up at night? How much are you upsetting your customers and having to go on apology tours with them? That's finally how you're measured, right?
I never thought of that before. Sort of using incidents as the way to sort of to base your thinking around, when they happen, how they happen less often, how do we resolve them faster and less painlessly, and then how do we do something so in the future that there's much less chance of this happening and it's much easier to deal with. That's quite a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, when I think about SRE or the general space of reliability engineering, I think it's kind of very similar to what was happening 20 years ago with QA. It used to be back in the day, you'd deploy software, you'd throw it over the wall to a QA group, and they'd do whatever they do over the course of 3 months before deploying it. And that worked great when you were deploying once a year or once in 3 years, right? Like at Oracle or wherever. It didn't work very great when you're doing a deployment every 12 seconds or even once a day or once a week, right? That's the world we're in today. So, how does that work? Well, you have automated tests. It's moved back actually into part of, the coding process is also writing these tests so that you can prove that it works. Does that mean we don't have QA people? Of course you still have QA people, because that's the humanistic model of figuring out what does my customer want? Well, the test can't figure out that things are slightly off in some interesting way. That's why we have performance engineers still. And I think that's where SRE is going to go. The way I used to think about QA back in the day was, what was the escape rate of bugs, of defects, right? And I used to call them defects rather than bugs, because defects are a problem I created, whereas bugs just exist in the world. So I have to, that was also a mindset change for me. And so, and then, you think about okay, I failed when the defect escaped into production. And so I think now as we think about incidents, it's a similar mindset to if I'm trying to engineer highly reliable systems on not highly reliable infrastructure, the incident is kind of a defect that escaped. And so how do I learn from it? How do I prevent it in the future? How do I create a continuous improvement cycle? How do I ask other people who maybe encountered something on the best approach there?
So I live in New Zealand. We are a small country. We have Australia pretty close, a bit bigger. But in this part of the world, unless there's a multinational which is based around here, which is not that common, the scale of the workloads going through computer systems is nowhere like it's in North America or Europe or China, generally, or India. But it seems to me like the value of SRE is slightly different in that context. So I used to work for quite a large organization, 13,500 staff, very complex systems, which are very, very hard to operate, like huge amounts of work just to keep these things running. Not a lot of load going through them, though. And to me, it was less about like making the services more reliable. Well, yes, but that's part of it. But more so about making operations easier, streamlined, cost-effective, and a more pleasant experience. Is that a valid
that's a
way to interpret?
Right? Because, there's a customer perspective. Your customer doesn't really care if you're happy as an employee, right? They care if they're happy and they're up. You care a lot about whether, you're up in the middle of the night. And so, how much work, how many steps it took you to do a deployment, deal with a change, whatever it is. So I think, automation, other mechanisms are a big, big deal there. And finally, we're trying to get to, the new buzzword in North America anyways, engineering efficiency, right? Because we have fewer people. We want to, people talk about doing more with less. I actually think about doing less with less. Okay, I have fewer people. I need to do less. So I better make it sure it's the highest productivity things that they're doing, not the junk work. So I guess a form of doing more with less.
Quality over quantity, or
exactly.
The valuable thing over just stuff,
Yeah.
So going back to the Reliabilityorg community, this is something I'm quite excited about, is that as a person who hosts a podcast and tries to go out and talk to people, most often people who want to talk about reliability are from vendors because they're incentivized to talk about it. I find it quite hard to find like practitioners who just want to share what they're working on. For me, that's really interesting. That's what I want to hear about and talk about. Do you think that having a community like Reliabilityorg will help bring those people out and give them a platform to?
Yeah, I really hope so. I mean, I'm not getting anything out of it. If anything, I'm putting some money into it, out of my personal account. But it's a 501c6, which basically means a nonprofit in the U.S. And but there are lots of people who run conferences and so forth. But people aren't going to conferences every day, and you can't put together all your questions and get in front of Mel Murphy on a conference, right? But you can maybe get one. But if you have questions or you have opinions, even more so, I think you can debate them in a community on an everyday basis, just like you would on the various communities that exist for developers.
Do you think there's anything we can do to encourage practitioners in the community to share what they're doing, or even not necessarily share, but even asking more questions?
Yes, I think the early days of a community are certainly the hardest, right? Where it's kind of, okay, I joined this community. What's going on? Nothing. So I think what you just need to have is a few anchor tenants go and post. Like, it's been great that you've been posting some of your work on, how to think about performance engineering and the sort of layers that occur in response times for things when there are, and how that's, and I kind of responded back to that, talking about how that affects P99 in the distributed system. And, I think those sorts of engagements are the ones I find valuable, right? So I think we just need more of that. And, there will be more of it inevitably, but we're going to have to tease it out of people. I just recently asked one of the admins to do some polling on there because it's easier for people to answer a poll as opposed to answer an opinion, provide an opinion or introduce a question. But we'll get there. I'm very confident that it's serving a need, so if it's serving a need, it will become active.
It's currently, because I'm a part of a lot of Slack Slack channels and groups.
Mm-hmm.
It's currently the one I'm already finding it the most interesting, and I'm engaging with it more than anything else. So that's
awesome.
a good sign.
I'm super happy to hear it. And I mean, who knows? Maybe someday we have a physical conference or create some tutorial things and all of that kind of stuff. But first goal, get 1,000 people on it, right, and have them chattering with each other, and that'll be in and of itself a huge gain.
You and I are both people who speak about reliability and other things in technology. What could you say to someone who's, say, working in SRE right now or any kind of reliability work, and they've never spoken, they've never published an article? What are the benefits of getting out there, or they're not part of a community even? So what do you think the benefits are of putting yourself out there?
Well, I would say first you should join communities just to learn. But it's so much more valuable if you can start to offer your opinions. And you will find that it's not as scary to do so once you start doing so. Honestly, I hated and honestly still hate doing LinkedIn videos. I do 4 every 2 weeks. Hate it. But people tell me that they really enjoy them. They're getting something out of it. So fine. I just show up, wake up, start talking about something or the other. This is ephemeral stuff, right? It's not like writing a paper you're going to be associated with for your entire career. And even that's fairly ephemeral, right? Think of it like Twitter.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's something to be said about getting involved in a community to start with, and then if you are, and at any point willing to write an article, write a blog or speak at a conference. There's some really nice conferences where you only have to speak for like 5 minutes, for example, and in quite a safe environment online.
Which ones do you like? Which conferences? Yeah, like this sort of thing. Maybe, like we should dig into that for the listeners.
I like sort of practitioner-led community conferences personally. So I went to AWS reInvent last year for the first time. Like, wow, I mean, that's a spectacle, but for me, that's not a place I'm going to go and learn. I'm probably not going to make a lot of connections, in the area that I'm interested in. Something like SRECon, SLOconf. Back in the performance engineering days, we had some pretty awesome events where it was just practitioners who would meet a small group and share stuff with each other and then present to the world. WOPA, the Workshop on Performance and Reliability, and there used to be PAC, the Neotis PAC events. They were awesome. Yeah. That's the kind of events I like. How about you?
Yeah, much the same. I mean, I tend not to have the time to go to a lot of things. When I go to things, it's just great to learn and find the new stuff that's happening out there. Ideally, shake up my thinking a little bit about some things, because it's really easy to start to get, into a rut. Like, okay, here's how I solve X. Well, maybe, but if it's being solved better now, it's something to learn. That's fantastic.
I only have one more question, which is that I think generally online and in the industry, we tend to gravitate towards discussing tools and technologies because that's, black and white, pretty clear. You use it or you don't use it. It's easy to understand. And so it's like, it's satisfying because I can talk about this. It's clear. Then we get to like practices and processes. It's a bit fuzzier. Still talk about it a bit, but then when it comes to culture change, which I think is maybe the most valuable thing we could possibly talk about, seems very hard to discuss in a sort of constructive way. Have you found that too? Have you got any advice or thoughts about that?
It's interesting. When I think about the SRE community in particular, I find it almost the opposite, that everyone wants to talk about culture and about processes, and no one actually wants to talk about how to reduce incidents. They're like, we'll do hug ops here because, Datadog was down for 11 hours. Like, okay, what am I learning from it that I can apply in my thing so I'm not down? I can give a hug to somebody, but, so what? I may be very much brass tacks oriented on that. I mean, I definitely understand that people are under pressure and, they need some help or, and it's a difficult time. And so I'm a strong believer in blameless cultures and a strong believer in how to build things that are fact-based and metric-based rather than data driven rather than. But that is a culture change I strongly support, and same way I support mechanisms like. And I do think we can learn from the world around us. Like I did a recent video, I'm not sure it's out yet, on the train derailment we had in East Palestine, Ohio. And, there's a lot to learn from it. But, what I learned most is a bunch of people pointing fingers because there are red facts and blue facts. Those are the colors of the parties here. And, that's unfortunate, right? It doesn't actually help prevent the next train derailment. But there are things that I can learn from.
I think that's fascinating. The fact that, it's easy to associate culture with just good feelings and we're all going to support each other. But you can absolutely, I think, have a culture which is, we're not going to blame anyone, but something bad has happened. And the culture is we all have curiosity about going in and figuring out what happened and how to prevent this from happening in the future. Like for me, that's a good culture. That sort of rigor. Like sure, blamelessness, but rigor around and wanting to be excellent.
I absolutely agree. The other thing that I think is really important as a takeaway there, like the reason often that we have problems is because people want to reduce their costs. And it's like if you've got something that's happening 1 in 10,000 times, like 99.99, but, taking you out for a day or, like spewing chemicals in near a town. It happens mostly because people are like, let me push the envelope a little bit here. And so part of rigor for me is helping people understand the probability of something occurring, the probability it occurs someplace where it's, populated or where it's going to cause significant damage. Because even most incidents, they don't really damage anything, but they could, and then figuring out, okay, what are the costs, even if they're rare? Because as human beings, we're kind of grounded in the 1, 2, 3, many model. We don't really understand how to think about things out of what that happen 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 times, or even more infrequently. But once we run large fleets, it's a big deal.
Before I close off and stop recording, is there anything else you wanted to cover or mention?
I guess the one thing I talk about there is I think you can really build a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle with reliability or its lack. The vicious cycle is you have to keep the site up. You didn't do a great job. You have a lot of tech debt. And now people start leaving. And so now the weight is being borne by yet fewer people. And, that cycle gets really bad. Eventually, you aren't doing any innovation because everyone is getting thrown into just keeping the lights on. That's the vicious cycle. The virtuous cycle is exactly the opposite. Each week, I try to get rid of 1% of my issues. So that's about finding out what is the biggest bang for the buck, and what is easiest. And then, just sort of tracking that forward. And over the course of the year, mathematically, right, you get to half the number of incidents or 40% of the incidents, right? And that's awesome. And people want to move from your team compared to the other team that's getting worse. It's again, discipline, rigor, applying engineering discipline into this, not just firefighting, but also fire safety. Just as we've done successfully for quality, just as we've done successfully for security, just as we've done successfully for performance. Does it mean that all those problems have gone away? No. But are they the same as they were 20 years ago? No. They're a lot better.
Thank you so much, Anurag, for chatting today about the Reliabilityorg community, and just for anyone out there who wants to get involved, how do they get involved? How do they join the community?
You go to reliability.org, and then you press a button, and you join the Slack community, and then you tell us a little bit about yourself, and off you go. And ask your questions, offer your opinions. It's easy.
Yeah, and I will say, definitely join if you are at all involved in this kind of work. It's been great so far, very engaged.
And it's only going to get better as more people join.
Yeah, so thanks. Yeah, thank you once again. And this is the end of another episode of Slight Reliability, and I will see you all in the next week or two.